The official handed Meredith Blackwood a small plastic bag. Inside was a charred platinum wedding band. The inscription was barely visible, but she recognized it immediately. "Forever yours, M." Her trembling fingers traced the outline of the ring through the plastic. "Yes," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "That's Thomas's wedding ring." With that confirmation, Meredith Blackwood joined the ranks of the widowed. Northwest Airlines Flight 4372 had claimed her husband of 3 years, leaving behind only fragments and ash scattered across the Rocky Mountains. Sometimes the dead don't stay buried, especially when they never died in the first place. Have you ever thought about what you'd do if your entire reality was built on a lie? If the foundation of your grief, your healing, and your new beginning was actually an elaborate deception? Welcome back to True Crime Hunter, where we examine the most shocking cases of deception and betrayal. If you appreciate stories that expose the darkest corners of human nature while delivering justice, hit that subscribe button and notification bell now. For 3 years, Meredith Blackwood visited an empty grave. She mourned a husband who wasn't dead. She weathered accusations from angry investors who lost millions in her husband's financial schemes. She defended the memory of the man she loved while rebuilding her shattered life piece by piece. Meanwhile, just 2 states away, Thomas Blackwood, now calling himself Richard Bennett, was sipping coffee at upscale cafes, advising wealthy retirees on their investments, and building a comfortable new life. No guilt, no remorse, no looking back. The discovery that would reunite them wouldn't come from sophisticated FBI techniques or international manhunts. Instead, it would come from a chance encounter in an art gallery, a single moment of recognition that would collapse Thomas's carefully constructed house of cards. This isn't just a story about a man who faked his death to escape prosecution. It's about the psychological toll of betrayal, the resilience of the human spirit, and the strange twist of fate that brought truth to light when all hope of justice seemed lost. How can someone mourn a person who never died? And what happens when the ghost you've been grieving suddenly reappears in flesh and blood? Meredith Walsh never intended to attend the Boston Children's Hospital Benefit Gala in spring 2013. A co-worker's last-minute illness thrust the 26-year-old pediatric nurse into a world of champagne flutes and designer gowns, a world where Thomas Blackwood moved with practiced ease. "He approached me with this confidence that wasn't arrogance," Meredith later told friends. "He asked questions and actually listened to the answers." Thomas Blackwood, 33, had already carved his place in Boston's financial elite. His investment firm catered to high-net-worth clients, and his reputation for delivering exceptional returns made him the golden boy of the banking world. His tailored suits and commanding presence turned heads, but it was his undivided attention that captured Meredith's heart. Their courtship moved at breakneck speed. Weekend trips to coastal Maine, private dinners at exclusive restaurants, front-row tickets to shows Meredith had only dreamed of attending. 8 months after that chance meeting, Thomas proposed at sunset on his family's generational estate in Vermont, the same location where they exchanged vows just 6 weeks later. "They seemed perfectly matched," recalled Eleanor Whitmore, a longtime friend of the Blackwood family. "She grounded him. He elevated her. Everyone envied what they had." The couple purchased a historic Victorian home in Oak Ridge, Vermont, a renovation project that showcased both Meredith's eye for design and Thomas's apparent financial stability. They hosted elaborate dinner parties where Thomas charmed the town's influential residents while Meredith formed genuine connections with their spouses. By all appearances, the Blackwoods had achieved domestic bliss. Thomas commuted to Boston 3 days a week, while Meredith transferred to the regional hospital. They joined the local historical society, donated generously to community causes, and spoke openly about starting a family. But by their 3rd anniversary, hairline cracks appeared in the flawless veneer. Thomas began working later, often returning home well past midnight. His phone would ring at odd hours, prompting him to step outside for private client calls. Meredith occasionally glimpsed names on his phone she didn't recognize, names that disappeared from the call log when she looked again. "It's just market volatility," Thomas explained when Meredith questioned his stress levels. "Nothing for you to worry about." Business trips multiplied. Tokyo 1 week, London the next. Increasingly, these trips came with minimal notice and vague explanations. "I need you to trust me," became his mantra when Meredith pressed for details. "Everything I do is for our future." By autumn 2016, Thomas had become a ghost in their marriage, physically present but emotionally absent. The warmth that once characterized their relationship had cooled to polite exchanges and superficial conversations. When he announced yet another last-minute trip to Seattle that October, Meredith barely looked up from her book. Neither realized it would be the last normal moment they would ever share. "The security line is ridiculous," Thomas complained, his voice echoing through Meredith's phone as she organized medications during her hospital shift. "I might miss this flight if it doesn't move faster." "Did you check in online at least?" Meredith asked, half listening while counting pill doses. "Yes, no checked bags. Listen, I've got to run. They're finally moving. I'll call when I land in Seattle. Love you." "Love you too," Meredith replied automatically, not knowing these casual words would haunt her for years to come. Thomas never called from Seattle. At 5:47 the next morning, Meredith's phone rang. Still half asleep, she answered to find her neighbor Vivian sobbing on the line. "Oh my God, Meredith, turn on the news, right now." Northwest Airlines Flight 4372 had vanished from radar over the Rocky Mountains during severe weather. Initial reports confirmed the worst. The plane had crashed in a remote wilderness area. 178 souls aboard, no signs of survivors. Meredith sat frozen before her television as helicopter footage showed a horrifying scene. Plane fragments scattered across a snow-covered mountainside. The crawling text at the bottom of the screen listed Thomas Blackwood among the passengers. The following days collapsed into a blur of phone calls, visitor processions, and official notifications. The airline sent representatives. The bank sent grief counselors. Friends brought food that remained untouched. "The crash site presents extraordinary challenges," the recovery coordinator explained during one of many conference calls. "The elevation, weather conditions, and terrain make traditional recovery operations nearly impossible. Early winter storms dumped 3 feet of snow on the crash site within days. Temperatures plunged below zero. Equipment malfunctioned in the extreme conditions. Body recovery became secondary to collecting essential evidence for the crash investigation." "We may never recover all the victims," the coordinator admitted gently. "Some families may need to accept that their loved ones will remain at the site permanently." Meredith joined dozens of other families waiting for closure that would never fully arrive. Some bodies were identified and returned to families. Others, including Thomas, were listed as presumed deceased, remains unrecoverable. 6 weeks after the crash, Meredith stood beside an empty casket at St. Luke's Episcopal Church. The pews overflowed with mourners, colleagues from Thomas's firm, childhood friends, college roommates, and nearly half the town of Oak Ridge. Martin Caldwell, Thomas's business partner, delivered a eulogy that painted Thomas as a financial visionary and loyal friend. "He leaves behind a legacy of excellence," Martin said, his voice breaking, "and a firm committed to honoring his memory by continuing his ethical approach to wealth management." Other partners nodded solemnly. Several openly wept. Meredith accepted condolences in a fog of grief, barely registering the conversations. She didn't notice how quickly some of Thomas's closest colleagues departed after the service, nor how they avoided specific questions about ongoing client accounts. In the months that followed, Meredith established her ritual of grief. She placed fresh flowers on his empty grave each Sunday. She joined a widow's support group. She kept his clothes hanging in their closet, occasionally burying her face in his suits to catch fading traces of his cologne. Her pain was raw, real, and all-consuming. But what if grief itself can be the perfect smokescreen for something far more calculated? While Meredith mourned a husband who never boarded that doomed flight, security cameras recorded Thomas Blackwood sliding into a taxi outside Logan Airport. Alive, unharmed, and heading not toward his departure gate, but away from the terminal entirely. 2 months after the funeral, Meredith opened her front door to find 3 people in suits standing on her porch. Their expressions conveyed none of the sympathy she'd grown accustomed to from visitors. "Mrs. Blackwood? I'm Special Agent Catherine Donovan with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. These are Agents Miller and Rossi. We need to speak with you regarding Blackwood Investment Partners." They sat in her living room, the room where Thomas had charmed dinner guests and potential clients, while Agent Donovan explained the investigation that had been underway for months before the crash. "We have evidence suggesting your husband operated what amounts to a Ponzi scheme that defrauded investors of approximately $30 million, Donovan said, watching Meredith's face carefully. "Money that's now missing." Meredith's grief, still raw and consuming, collided with shock. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Thomas was successful. His clients loved him." "They loved the returns he fabricated," Agent Miller countered, sliding documents across the coffee table. "These are bank statements showing money transfers to offshore accounts. These are falsified investment reports. And these," he hesitated, "are complaints filed by clients who tried to withdraw significant funds in the weeks before your husband's death." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Meredith as certainty crumbled. Her husband, the man whose memory she'd defended and cherished, was being painted as a criminal. Over the next 6 weeks, federal agents dismantled Meredith's life piece by piece. They seized computers, financial records, and correspondence. They questioned her repeatedly about her knowledge of Thomas's business practices, his associates, and his financial activities. "Did you ever question how you afforded this lifestyle? Did he discuss clients or investments at home? Were you aware of any unusual cash transactions? Did Thomas mention traveling to any of these countries?" Meredith cooperated fully, submitting to polygraph tests and providing access to personal accounts. Eventually, investigators cleared her of involvement, but that offered little comfort as her world collapsed around her. Legal notices arrived demanding the Blackwood estate repay defrauded investors. The beautiful Victorian home, the one she'd lovingly restored, was seized as an asset. Her bank accounts were frozen, then emptied to compensate victims. Even her car was confiscated as potentially purchased with fraudulent funds. The social fallout proved equally brutal. Overnight, Meredith transformed from grieving widow to pariah. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. Invitations vanished. Whispers followed her through grocery store aisles. She must have known. No one could be that blind. "I bet the money is hidden somewhere." Thomas's victims, many of whom were Oak Ridge residents who'd trusted him with retirement savings and college funds, directed their anger at the only Blackwood they could reach. Meredith found her mailbox filled with hate mail. Someone threw eggs at her rental apartment. A brick shattered her window with a note, "Thieves pay." Pause this video and comment below. Could you rebuild your life after such betrayal? How would you move forward when you've lost everything, including the truth about the person you loved? With nothing left in Oak Ridge but painful memories, Meredith retreated into anonymity. She moved to a small apartment in Burlington, accepted a night shift position at the university hospital, and adopted a cat from the local shelter. She stopped using her married name, reverting to Meredith Walsh professionally. Her life contracted to the essentials: work, sleep, basic survival. The nurse who had once dreamed of starting a family now lived in self-imposed isolation, her trust in others shattered by the man who had promised to love her forever. "I became invisible by choice," she later explained. "Nursing was the only part of my former life I could salvage, the only identity that remained untainted by Thomas's deception. Healing came in almost imperceptible increments. 6 months after moving to Burlington, Meredith Walsh bought a plant, her first commitment to nurturing something beyond her own survival. When it flowered, she wept. A year after the crash, she joined a grief support group that met Tuesday evenings in a church basement. Unlike her colleagues at the hospital, who knew nothing of her past, these strangers understood loss intimately. Here, she could speak Thomas's name without explanation. "Grief changes when betrayal is involved," she admitted during her third session. "I'm mourning the person I thought I knew, not the person he actually was." Gloria, a retired teacher who had lost her daughter to addiction, reached out after that meeting. "Complicated grief needs witnesses," she told Meredith. Their weekly coffee dates became Meredith's first tentative step back toward human connection. Slowly, cautiously, Meredith constructed a modest social circle. She joined a community garden, tending vegetables alongside neighbors who knew her only as the quiet nurse with the gentle hands. She volunteered at an animal shelter on weekends, finding comfort in creatures who offered affection without judgment or questions. 18 months after Thomas's death, Meredith visited her therapist with unexpected news. She had laughed, genuinely laughed, at a coworker's joke. The sound had startled her, feeling foreign in her throat. "You're allowed joy again," her therapist reminded her. "It's not a betrayal of your pain to experience happiness." The joy came from unexpected sources. Morning sunlight through her kitchen window, the purr of her cat against her chest, fresh tomatoes from her garden plot. Small pleasures accumulated like pennies in a jar, eventually amounting to something valuable. 2 years after the crash, Meredith's car broke down on a rainy evening. The mechanic who stayed late to help was Daniel Harrington, a high school history teacher who moonlighted at his brother's auto shop. His kindness came without agenda, his conversation without probing questions. When he asked for her number, her first instinct was refusal. "I'm not in a good place for dating," she explained. "How about friendship?" Daniel countered. "Everyone needs friends with reliable transportation." Their relationship progressed with deliberate slowness. Museum visits, farmers markets, historical walking tours where Daniel's enthusiasm for local architecture made Meredith smile despite herself. He never pushed for more than she offered, respecting the boundaries she established without question. "I have trust issues," she finally confessed over dinner 4 months after they met. "I figured," Daniel replied. "But I believe in earning trust, not demanding it." For the first time in years, Meredith envisioned possibilities beyond survival. Perhaps there could be a future where Thomas Blackwood was just a painful chapter in her story, not the defining catastrophe of her life. But just as she began to believe in second chances, "Mrs. Blackwood? This is Detective Lydia Ortiz from the Arizona State Police." Meredith gripped the phone tighter. "My husband died 3 years ago." A pause. "That's exactly what we need to discuss. We have reason to believe Thomas Blackwood is alive and living in Sedona, Arizona." The room tilted. Meredith sat down hard, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. The detective explained. Gregory Paulson, a former investment client who had lost $800,000 in Thomas's scheme, had been vacationing in Sedona. While browsing an upscale art gallery, he locked eyes with a bearded man in expensive glasses who immediately turned away. "At first, I thought I was hallucinating," Paulson told investigators. "But those eyes, I'd stared at them across my dining room table while he convinced me to invest my retirement. I'd know them anywhere." Paulson followed the man discreetly, taking several photos with his phone. He watched him drive away in a modest Audi, noting the license plate before contacting the FBI. The plates led to Richard Bennett, a financial consultant who had appeared in Sedona approximately 8 weeks after Flight 4372 crashed. Bennett specialized in retirement planning for wealthy retirees, maintaining a modest lifestyle that attracted minimal attention. His trimmed beard, weight loss, and designer glasses created sufficient alteration to pass casual inspection. When we ran the photos through facial recognition software, Detective Ortiz explained, we got a 98% match to Thomas Blackwood's driver's license. The next revelation stunned Meredith even more. Thomas had never boarded Flight 4372. FBI agents reviewing the crash investigation discovered anomalies. Thomas had checked in online but never dropped off luggage. His boarding pass had been scanned at security, but not at the gate. A methodical review of airport security footage showed Thomas entering the terminal, proceeding through security, and then exiting the airport via taxi rather than continuing to his departure gate. He deliberately used the crash as cover, Ortiz explained. He knew recovery would be complicated by the terrain. He knew authorities might presume his death without recovering a body. The investigation uncovered Thomas's meticulous preparation. In the months before his disappearance, he had established the Richard Bennett identity with expertly forged documentation. He had rented an apartment in Phoenix under this name 3 months before the crash. He had gradually transferred funds to anonymous offshore accounts that later financed his new life. "Why Arizona?" Meredith asked, still struggling to process the revelation. "Confidence," Detective Ortiz replied. "Most fugitives flee the country or at least move across it. By staying relatively close, he avoided international scrutiny while maintaining familiar surroundings. His arrogance made him believe a beard and glasses would be sufficient disguise." Investigators had placed Bennett under surveillance while building their case. They documented his daily routines, his client meetings, his casual conversations at local cafes, all while gathering evidence of his true identity. "Mrs. Blackwood," Detective Ortiz said gently, "we need you to formally identify him before we make an arrest. Can you come to Arizona?" FBI agents surrounded Richard Bennett's Adobe-style home at 5:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. Tactical teams secured all exits while surveillance confirmed he was alone inside. They waited until he entered his kitchen, catching him in his bathrobe holding a coffee mug as agents broke through his front and back doors simultaneously. "Thomas Blackwood, you are under arrest for wire fraud, financial crimes, and faking your own death," announced the lead agent, while Thomas stood frozen, coffee spilling onto his imported tile floor. His only response, "I want my lawyer." The facade of Richard Bennett collapsed under scrutiny. Forensic accountants traced $3.7 million Thomas had embezzled before his disappearance. The money had been expertly laundered through shell companies in the Cayman Islands before being gradually reintroduced as Bennett's investment capital. While Meredith had lost her home and reputation, Thomas had been living on stolen funds in comfort. His arrest triggered a media frenzy. National news vans lined the streets of Sedona. Headlines blared across networks. "Dead banker found alive," "Husband's ultimate betrayal," "Financial fraudster rose from the grave." Reporters camped outside Meredith's apartment, Daniel's classroom, and the homes of Thomas's victims. Morning shows dissected every detail. How had he evaded detection for 3 years? Why had he remained so close to his former life? What would his wife say when she saw him again? The trial began 9 months later. Prosecutors presented devastating evidence of Thomas's calculation. His laptop contained detailed research on plane crashes and body recovery statistics. His phone held screenshots of articles about presumed deaths and legal declarations. Most damning was a storage unit rented 6 months before the crash. Inside, investigators found multiple identity packages, $50,000 in cash, detailed contingency plans for various scenarios, and a notebook outlining his strategy. One page contained a simple checklist. Convert assets to cash. Secure offshore accounts. Establish Richard Bennett identity. Rent. Arizona apartment. Book flight known for mountain route. Disappear during crash chaos. His defense team attempted to claim mental health issues had driven his actions, but the evidence of meticulous planning destroyed this narrative. On the 3rd day of trial, Meredith took the stand. The courtroom fell silent as she entered, every eye tracking her path to the witness box. When asked to identify the defendant, she looked directly at Thomas for the first time in 3 years. "That's my husband," she said, her voice steady. "The man I grieved for, the man I defended when others called him a thief." During cross-examination, Thomas's attorney suggested Meredith might have benefited from his disappearance. Her response electrified the courtroom. "I visited an empty grave every month for 3 years. I apologized to people he had stolen from. I lost my home, my reputation, and my belief in basic human decency. Meanwhile, he was sipping espresso in Arizona coffee shops without a moment's regret for the destruction he left behind." This story isn't over. Subscribe now to True Crime Hunter so you don't miss what happens next. Hit that notification bell to learn how Meredith rebuilds her life after this ultimate betrayal. The jury deliberated just 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge sentenced Thomas Blackwood to 27 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for 18 years. The court ordered all his remaining assets seized and redistributed to victims, with Meredith recognized as having suffered unique and extraordinary damages, deserving priority compensation. As marshals led Thomas away, he turned toward Meredith one last time. She had already left the courtroom. The media spotlight eventually shifted away from Meredith, but the psychological aftermath remained. She entered intensive therapy, working through what her counselor called compound trauma. Grief, followed by betrayal, followed by public exposure. "I had to mourn him twice," Meredith explained to her therapist. "First as the husband I thought died, then as the man who never existed at all." Her relationship with Daniel survived but required rebuilding. They attended couples counseling where Meredith confronted her fear of being deceived again. "Trust isn't blind faith," their counselor emphasized. "It's a calculated risk based on consistent evidence." Gradually, Daniel's steady presence and transparent honesty created a foundation stronger than what she had known with Thomas. 2 years after the trial, they married in a private ceremony attended only by close friends. Professionally, Meredith transferred to Boston Children's Hospital, returning to her original passion for pediatric nursing. She found healing in caring for children, their honesty and resilience providing daily inspiration. "Children don't hide who they are," she noted. "That authenticity became my North Star." When approached by publishers, Meredith initially refused to write about her experience. Eventually, she recognized the therapeutic potential and authored Grieving a Living Man, which became a bestseller and was optioned for a limited television series. The memoir allowed her to reclaim control of her narrative after years of having her story defined by Thomas's actions. With a portion of the proceeds, she established the Truth Recovery Foundation, providing financial and emotional support to spouses and families affected by financial crimes and fraudulent disappearances. "The victims of financial fraud suffer twice," Meredith explained during the foundation's launch. "First through financial loss, then through the shame and isolation that follows." Thomas, meanwhile, adapted to prison life with the same adaptability he had shown in creating Richard Bennett. He taught financial literacy classes to fellow inmates, participated in restorative justice programs, and wrote monthly letters to Meredith seeking forgiveness. She returned each one unopened. When asked about forgiveness in a rare interview, Meredith responded with measured wisdom. "Forgiveness is personal. My healing doesn't require his absolution." Her most quoted statement came during a speech at a victim advocacy conference. "For 3 years I was defined by his death. Then for another 3 years I was defined by his deception. Now, finally, I'm defined by my own resilience. That's the story I choose to tell." The Blackwood case fundamentally altered how federal agencies approach identity fraud investigations. The FBI now includes proximity analysis in fugitive profiles, recognizing that some criminals hide remarkably close to their former lives, a psychological blind spot in traditional manhunts. We assumed someone with his resources would flee internationally. admitted FBI Special Agent Donovan. "We never considered he might establish himself just 2 states away." Forensic psychologists who studied Thomas's choices identified what they termed arrogant proximity syndrome, the belief that minor appearance changes provide sufficient disguise while allowing the comfort of familiar surroundings. "He believed himself intellectually superior to investigators," explained Dr. Ramona Vega, who analyzed the case for the Justice Department. This overconfidence created a vulnerability that ultimately led to his capture. In Oak Ridge, Vermont, the story refuses to fade. The Victorian house once owned by the Blackwoods now operates as a bed and breakfast, where guests occasionally report seeing a woman's figure at an upstairs window, a ghost story that draws curious visitors year-round. Local tour guides include the home on their routes, explaining how appearances deceive and trust can be weaponized. For many residents, the Blackwood saga serves as a cautionary tale about the facades people construct. The case continues generating academic interest, with law schools using it to illustrate the intersection of financial crimes, identity fraud, and psychological manipulation. Criminology textbooks cite it as a classic example of hubris leading to capture. If you found this story of deception and resilience compelling, share it with someone who appreciates true crime with meaningful lessons. Subscribe to True Crime Hunter for more cases that explore the complex psychology behind shocking crimes. Remember, appearances can deceive, trust can be manipulated, and sometimes the most dangerous lies aren't the ones others tell us, but the ones we tell ourselves.